What is wrong with Disney's live-action remakes? Today I'm here to answer just that. The Lion King, Aladdin, and Mulan. What do these three films have in common? Well, these three films we already had and didn't ask for again. Of course, I understand Disney put a ton of time into redoing the animation with the CGI of certain animals to capture the Disney magic, but I wanted to go back to when the team thought of the idea of remaking the original films into live action. Starting with the 1994 version of Disney's The Jungle Book, I don't think a lot of people knew about this one, as we get two other versions of the live-action Jungle Book films. This one in 1994 was brought to light when Raju Patel, an Indian producer, figured the 100th anniversary of Kipling's Jungle Book story's publication should be commemorated with a film adaptation. No, I don't want to blame all the rest of the remakes entirely on him, however this is where it starts. Disney chairman Jeffrey Katzenberg saw the potential of adapting the animated classic and assigned Ronald Janver and Mark Geldman to write the project. The first script being 180 pages with 70 having no lines of dialogue. Now if we think about this, what if this script was passed and created in this format? That would mean that the perception of this movie would have been way different. Think of Tarzan for a minute. We were greeted with him as a baby and saw him, his parents, what happened to them, and his new family. Obviously we know that Tantar and Kerchak and Turk all can talk, but I don't think people would mind if they didn't conversate. A lot can happen even with no dialogue as long as what's happening on screen the audience is able to follow. It was pointed out that this version had much more detail in it than in 1967. These scenes are unsuitable for small children and the PG rating is laughable. What's hard to understand is why the producers would even want to pass off Kipling's The Jungle Book as a children's movie, when it holds up perfectly well as a competent example of the Indiana Jones genre. At the time, it looked like the film didn't have a particular audience in mind while putting it all together. I do have more questions and we'll be talking about later films like 101 and 102 Dalmatians, Cinderella, Beauty and the Beast, and The Lion King, as well as new films that were recently announced on D23, so stick around for those as well. I wanted to stop for a second and very subtly ask for you to subscribe so you don't miss what else I have in store, like the problem with Illumination films. I also have tons of theories like my predictions on Toy Story 5 and why Monster House was a better movie than some might think, and as a thank you, here's a picture of Mickey Mouse holding some balloons. The second film we got to see live is 101 Dalmatians in 1994. Now this being a film with a bunch of puppies, we let it slide. The reviews were mixed with audience and critics alike. The exaggeration in the acting and the facts that they got wrong, like this comment on the raccoons. One of the problems is when we watch films like this, we automatically compare them to the first one we saw, because we believe that one had the correct outcome. So every movement that these actors make, we judge. And yes, that is Disney's fault, because we watched the animated version first, and because we trust Disney with the new animated films, because they get the story right, but the first time only. Before we get into the rest of these films, however, I do want to speak on Disney losing its originality. With the upcoming releases of The Little Mermaid, Mufasa the Lion King, where we do get to explore Mufasa's life more than we know, at the same time, the audience is picking up that Disney isn't releasing new movies with new storylines, just revisiting old ones and reimagining them. But then what I mentioned earlier, if and most likely you have seen the first film, your brain will remember scenes from the first one and identify what it has already seen, giving you a deja vu effect, and your interest will slowly decline. Back to 101 Dalmatians, most of the audience was focused on the casting choice of Cruella DeVille, Glenn Close, who I do want to point out that she did a pretty good representation of it, but this particular film wasn't the problem for Disney. As we move on to Alice in Wonderland, then the problem starts to appear. Red Barracuda on IMDb says, despite an agreeable tendency towards visual flamboyance, I leave his films feeling somewhat underwhelmed. Alice in Wonderland is a case in point. It's a movie where CGI effects rule the day, but the trouble is that the true weirdness that is at the heart of this story is not captured at all with the all-computer generated imagery on screen. If you're going to recreate a film like this, there needs to be more to it than the CGI and 3D effects. Some even say that the plot didn't make sense logically. The casting choice for these films is another problem, and I will talk about The Little Mermaid as the best example. Now, I don't want to stem too far into it due to controversy and nothing against Halle Berry. From the trailer, she does do a good job at portraying Ariel. In response to people saying that she isn't the person who should be playing Ariel, they simply mean that if you are going to cast an actress to play a part that many are already familiar with, then it's important that you find someone who somewhat resembles the animated version. Of course, that seems impossible, but when you look at previous castings of people who have played certain characters in the live action versus animated world, it doesn't have to be that complicating. Next we move on to Maleficent. Angelina Jolie did a remarkable job for her performance in the movie, but almost want to say that this is the only reason the film got any traction. With a budget of $180 million turning into $758, let's see what real reason was for this film making so much money. Variety wrote that the film's opening weekend outperforming initial box office projections was later attributed by analysts in part to Disney's successful marketing to potent demographic, as in female audiences, much like the studio accomplished with Frozen, in which both films feature a strong female lead. Disney argued that a lack of family-friendly options in the marketplace would bode well for Maleficent's box office performance. In its 2 first weeks of release, this is very much the reason for the movie's success, and like I said earlier, the reason a lot, not all, but a lot of these movies fail is because we know the character firsthand from the animated versions. One reviewer of this film writes, "Angelina Jolie is perfectly cast as the title character and does a great job in the role. The scene taken from the original movie, when she curses Aurora as a child, was really well done. The rest of the movie is not what I wanted nor what I needed. Hashtag not my Maleficent." According to this article from Wizard Dojo, the man called Scott says that Cinderella was better than Maleficent in terms of the story. However, even the story from Cinderella wasn't good because there was no curve in her character. He said, quote, "Disney's last attempt at turning one of their animated films into a live-action feature, Maleficent, was a bit of a mess. There wasn't a single plot twist that didn't feel both predictable and forced. Lacking in surprises, the actor herself was casted well. It was the problem with story and where Cinderella was going that made the reviews half what they could have been. Then again, this wasn't the worst of Disney's attempt at live action." We then move on to Cruella, another antagonist-focused film that was designed to make you empathize with her. Also, another point I want to make from the casting point of view is Disney may be casting all of these actors and actresses for the live action version to distract us from the story and make us focus on how the actress portrays a character we are already familiar with. Like, imagine if there was a Frozen live action film. We've seen theater versions of this played many times, but I'm talking CGI and special effects, the whole works. What would you think and how would you feel if Disney were to announce such a story? Would you be worried that they messed up a classic story, or would you be upset? Rotten Tomatoes website's critics' consensus reads, "Cruella can't quite answer the question of why its title character needed an origin story, but its dazzling visual feast is awfully fun to watch whenever its leading ladies lock horns. If you read between the lines, this is exactly what I mentioned earlier. Cruella can't quite answer the questions of why its title character needed an origin story, meaning not only did she not need one, but we were distracted by it because of the actress that they chose to play the part." More recently, there is The Jungle Book, and not the first live-action version in 1994, but in 2016. The film would be Disney's third live-action adaptation of Kipling's works, following the 1994 film and the 1998 direct-to-video from Mowgli's story, and the studio's fourth overall after the 1967 animated film. The story from the film is not independently taken from Kipling's works, but also borrows cinematic aspirations from other films. This one was one of the better films, straightforward and didn't stray away from other side stories that would be irrelevant, having the animation being the main complaint of this film. Beauty and the Beast was Disney's second princess live-action film. Many reviewers of this fairy tale spoke on the fact that this one was truly a cash grab and a copy and paste from Disney, specifying that tries to cash in on the magic without capturing what was behind that fairy dust in the first place. Mulan failed to do what the original story did, capture the truth and heart in Mulan's character, with many saying that there was some parts that were right and some that were wrong, once again comparing the original animation that we are all familiar with. The stakes are lower, it's not just as a strong story. The film even triggered protests in Hong Kong due to how they portrayed some of the actors. I will admit they did get better with Dumbo's animation style, however the story itself was completely bare. Acting like Dumbo himself was the side character, when the title of the movie was his name. Sometimes more is less. The heart of the story is found in Dumbo's character, not the layers of CGI action that surround him. If you haven't noticed, there's a pattern here. In an attempt to recreate a story that has already been told, the creators get too distracted trying to make it lifelike that they forget about the story or want to tweak the story just enough so it's not an identical copy, move for move, that they unintentionally put less effort in the other. Dumbo attempts to revive a movie made all the way back in 1941. However, a ridiculous plot and weak antagonist prevents it from doing so. Lastly, we can mention The Lion King, who recently announced there is going to be another remake of Mufasa's origin story. I also want to say that this film was the lowest scored live action film, and I can honestly say I'm pretty nervous about the Mufasa origin story. For this movie alone, there were some people who used deepfakes to manipulate the lion's face to look more like the characters, which put more visuals into it than we thought. But I'm really curious what your thoughts are and where you think the company is going with all these remakes. Make sure you're subscribed and click the little notification bell so you never miss another upload. I very much appreciate it, and we'll see you all next time.